Hey y'all, Jamie O here, and today we'll be talking about the effectiveness of food labels. Hey y'all, so food labels are something that have become so annoying. I think they've kind of just gotten on everyone's nerves. So on the one hand, they're super useful because people are getting more involved with their food, which is great. Consumers now actually want to know where their food came from, how it was treated before it came to the shelves, who it supports once it's bought, and all those things are great. However, my issue with food labels is that one, it creates this elitist attitude, not from the buyer so much, but from people who witness the buyer purchasing these items, and I'll get to that in a second. And also it creates confusion. So with the first part, with the elitist attitudes, I've had several conversations, especially with family members who say, why does it have to be organic? Why does it have to be local? Why does it this? Why does it that? And I understand their concern, and I've had a couple family members who said, well, back during my time, food was always organic or food was always local, and that's true, and that's an important part of this conversation. You shouldn't have to worry about where your food came from. You shouldn't have to worry about what kind of chemicals are on it or were used to rear it, and how the workers who helped produce it were treated and how the animal itself was treated. You should not have to worry about that. However, when people buy foods that have those labels on them, it's not because they're trying to be better than anyone else. They're trying to make sure that our food system is getting better. I understand that some people think that by saying, oh, I only eat organic, or oh, I only eat cage-free eggs or something like that, I understand where that could be seen or misconstrued as an elitist attitude, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is that these people are trying to make sure that they make a purchase that makes a difference. It's no different than you donating to your favorite charity or volunteering with your favorite organization. It's the same thing. By participating in this thing, you are helping to make the system better. So, with the confusion part, often we see something that says, say, organic, and a lot of people just assume that organic means no chemicals. That's not true. Organic can actually mean that a food was reared with pesticides, but they were natural pesticides that don't harm the workers or the people eating the food or long-term harm to the system. So take, for example, this fight we've had about bees lately. The issue with the pesticides that are used for those foods grown with these particular chemicals is not that they're using pesticides, it's that because pesticides do help rear crops, and yes, there are other avenues you can take to reduce pests and weeds for your plants. However, the issue is that these chemicals are harming bees and are causing bee populations to decline. And so that's the issue. So when someone purchased something that's organic, it doesn't mean that necessarily there were no chemicals. It just means that there were no chemicals that are harmful to the system. Same thing with cage-free eggs. Cage-free eggs doesn't necessarily mean that the chickens that raised your eggs were out and about in the field and having a great time and just laying eggs. It actually means, or can mean, that the chickens weren't confined to a cage. So you can think of, in this case, like factory farming. So instead of the chickens being in a bunch of cages and confined in that way, they're in these large, basically hen houses where chickens can barely move. They're breathing in all kinds of terrible chemicals, basically from their own feces. And so it's not much better than a cage. In some cases, it can be worse than a cage. So, yeah, it's great that they got to walk around more, but did they really get to walk around more? So, the point of these labels and the idea behind these labels is that our system has really gone to a monoculture system. So, I've seen that in my own home. Why I got involved in this food movement and in wanting to create this channel and opening my farmers market is because I was seeing that whereas 50 years ago in my home, people basically raised most of their own food, they were able to trade what they didn't raise to get things that they needed. But you didn't have to worry about, was this raised the right way? Was the pig happy? Was the lettuce grown in a way that's not going to harm me and it didn't harm the person who picked it? And so now what I see mostly corn, soybeans, and wheat. And it's not that there's an issue with corn, soybeans, and wheat. The issue is that there's no diversity. And without diversity, you get lots of weeds because the soil doesn't have a chance to breathe and repopulate the nutrients that plants will need to grow in that area. And so then you'll have more weed killers. And with more weed killers, you end up having more fertilizers. And so it just creates this cyclic problem, and all of those chemicals ultimately end up in the water system and end up in our bodies. And so when we have the food labels, it helps to make the farmer accountable, because in a lot of cases, and especially in my home, and this is nothing against these farmers, I mean, I love my local farmers, but in a lot of cases, they're encouraged by their government, they're encouraged by grants, they're encouraged by their extension agents to grow these things, even by their land grant universities to grow these things. And one, most of it's not even used for food. And two, even if it was, people can't live on corn, soybeans, and wheat alone. And so the farmers themselves are uninformed because this is their business, this is their livelihood. And so they're not necessarily thinking, what am I doing to the earth? They're thinking, this is what is supposed to be done, and this is how I feed my family. So basically we create the system where they're pumping out all of these things, not necessarily thinking much beyond the dollar. And so when you see something that costs more, like an organic produce, it doesn't cost more just because of the sticker that's on there. It costs more because it's helping to combat those monocultural beliefs. And so we look at, say, a cheap bag of potato chips. We don't think about how much that cheap bag of potato chips costs to the environment. It costs to our health. Those are things that you can't monetize. And so by having things like organic labels, by having programs and certifications like your pasture-raised meats, that's when you get the farmer to think, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is not good for the earth, and let me pass this on through the system and make it a little bit better. So I don't think that having all of these food labels is a great thing, because it almost feels like you're taking a test when you go to the grocery store, because you're trying to figure out, does cage-free here mean that it was actually pasture-raised, so that the chickens were able to roam around and they were happy, or does it mean that they were just in a large factory facility? You have to do all of this thinking just to buy something like eggs, and it's completely unnecessary. But until we get back to a system where we don't have to think about that, I do think that these food labels are absolutely necessary. So I'd say definitely do some research on these labels, and of course leave some comments below, or leave some comments on my Patreon page so that you can learn more about food labels. I've written several pieces about food labeling, and it is something to be educated on. But ultimately, if we can get back to a system where we're all raising just a little bit of our own food, or we're sourcing it from our own homes, we'll create a better system. So as always, if you like this video, please go ahead and share it, because the purpose of this channel is to help empower people through food, and by sharing it, you are empowering someone through food. And also, if you'd like to make sure you see more videos from me, please go ahead and click the subscribe button below and hit the little bell so you can get notifications when new videos come out. As always, a special thank you to my foodies on Patreon, and thanks for watching.